Welcome to the Manhattan Project. This is day 19. So tonight, John and I both went to the IFC Center, but once again saw different movies. I went to go see Crown Heights. My phone also went and acted weird on me. Take a look at that.
For some reason, my phone screwed up and didn't record anything when I went to the IFC Center. There's just a bunch of white videos there. Sorry, next time we'll do better.
Anyway, I got rained on. That's probably my punishment for screwing up. But anyway, I went to go see Crown Heights. It tells the story of Colin Warner, a kid from Brooklyn who's wrongfully incarcerated for murder he didn't commit on like the flimsiest evidence and was in jail for over 20 years until some people worked really hard to help get him out. This tells his story, and take a look at the trailer.
The system doesn't work for people who can't afford to defend themselves.
The whole neighborhood know what happened. The whole neighborhood know you grabbed the wrong guy.
I'm an innocent man.
I don't know you the way a mother should know her son.
Everyone's saying you did something. After a while, you start to question yourself.
What were your expectations going into this movie, Evan?
I didn't really have much of an expectation, only because I didn't really know that much about the story. I had seen like 3 seconds of the trailer or something, and I saw there's a guy in jail, and I knew that it had Lakeith Stanfield from Atlanta in it. So I was like, I guess it's about a guy who goes to jail. I didn't even know it was a true story until it started, and then I was like, oh, it's a true story. Crown Heights tells an interesting story and has some interesting tidbits, but is ultimately a fairly unengaging movie that really would work better as sort of an informational piece than as a cinematic achievement. And guess what? It actually started as a This American Life radio play, podcast, whatever, and then was adapted into a movie. And honestly, you can kind of feel that in the writing. And not just in the writing, in some of the presentation. Although this movie does have things like dream sequences and cinematic editing, slow motion, stuff like that, it also has certain scenes in the movie that are filmed kind of like a documentary would do it. I read an interview with the director talking about how this was initially going to be produced by a much larger studio. They basically bought the rights to the story and tried developing it for a couple of years, but it wasn't working out. And that to me makes sense, because when you take a really important story that was told really well in This American Life, one of the best ways to get more people to hear about it would be to make a big, prestige Oscar movie. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it got made in this avenue, which is a small indie film that, honestly, I don't think that many people are going to see. This American Life gets 1 million listeners a week, and I don't think 1 million people are going to buy tickets to this movie. Anyway, enough about the origins and more about how that potentially affected the actual creation of the movie. The good things about this movie, like I said, are certain particular interesting points of information about it. It has a very strong sense of identity when it comes to Brooklyn. This movie isn't just about black people in Brooklyn, it's specifically about people who come from the West Indies, so countries like Trinidad and Tobago, stuff like that. Our main character comes from Trinidad. Lakeith Stanfield does a really good job playing him, I think, speaking with the right accent. A lot of other people in this movie are like that too. It's really sort of a cast filled with people who'd be like, oh, I recognize that actor from this movie, that movie, getting the opportunity to finally shine here. Like Lakeith Stanfield, he's had more comedy roles, but now he gets a dramatic role and does a perfectly good job with it. But like I said, stylistically, there's just something a little off. This movie is less than 100 minutes, and I'm not saying that it needed to be some 3-hour epic, but there's so much information conveyed that it moves at kind of a weirdly ruthless pace at times, particularly at the beginning and at the end. The middle does do a good job of showing just how shitty it would be to be in jail for many years of your young life. But there seem to be a lot more interesting aspects of his trial and why he got incarcerated in the first place that they just kind of hum along through. This movie reminded me a lot at random moments of that TV show The Night Of, which was an 8-episode event on HBO. That could have been 5 episodes and still been just as good, but imagine if you took those 8 episodes of the criminal justice system in New York and pushed it down to less than 2 hours. There's a kind of a twist that goes on about 20 minutes into the movie about why he gets sent to jail, because the real murderer, who was also on trial with him, it was like a dual murder trial, didn't make a choice that would have let him walk free and just the murderer go to jail. He was kind of selfish. And that to me felt like a huge moment. But they don't really build up to it. You don't get the chance to necessarily absorb that really powerful moment. He's just in jail, and in jail for a long time. But when he's in jail, there's still a couple interesting moments. You learn stuff about how conjugal visits are arranged, or the extent that prisoners can not just go to the library and read books, but they specifically have law libraries within jails because they know that inmates want to read about how laws work and work on their own appeals. So stuff like that definitely helped flesh out the movie. It's never boring, and in fact, that narrative ruthlessness I talk about helps keep things moving. It just doesn't make you feel quite as engaged with the characters and with the conflict that's going on. The only main thing I feel the need to properly criticize in this movie is the way it depicts the relationship of his friend, this guy, Chris King, who worked really, really hard to clear his name. Chris King in the movie is presented as a really good guy who works really hard to the point that it alienates his relationship with his wife and with his kids. And while I'm sure that happened in real life, in this movie, his wife is basically a non-character. She just kind of shows up to be disapproving of him, saying, "You're spending too much time trying to free your friend. Why don't you spend time with your family?" And I'm sure they had conversations like that. If the movie spent a little bit more time developing her character and getting to that really interesting pathos that his friend is spending hours and hours of his time trying to free a guy who will probably never be free, as opposed to raising his own children, that could have been a nice subplot to the movie. Instead, it's just like, his friend worked really hard, he had a couple bumps in the road like that, but let's move on. By the end of the movie, it does link up to the present day, and we get to see pictures of what the people look like now. I thought it was an interesting choice regarding the casting and regarding the makeup in this movie, that for most of the principals, like Lakeith Stanfield, like the Chris King actor, they don't really do that much old age makeup. 20 years pass, and they just have their hairstyle change and their clothing changes because it goes from the 80s to the 2000s. But for some of the smaller side characters, they will recast 18-year-olds to being 40-year-olds. And as far as movies with casting goes, this was pretty accurate as far as what people looked like. So overall, the points I give Crown Heights are an accuracy regarding the criminal justice system, regarding the people involved, regarding the general story. How's it play out as a movie? Honestly, not that great. It's a little bit hard to recommend to people when they could probably get the same story and feel the same emotions, perhaps delivered in an even better package just by listening to the initial This American Life story, or probably reading some articles that were written in the meantime. So what obscure metaphor would I use for this movie? I'd say, well, it's more like a podcast than a movie.
So that sounds like it's a 1.5 out of 4.
Yeah, like 1.5 out of 4, maybe a 2. It's kind of like with an inconvenient sequel, hard to criticize this movie because it's telling an important story and doesn't make that many major missteps. There's the underwritten character of Chris King's wife. Colin Warner's wife is also a little bit underwritten, but it just feels like this movie, which probably didn't have that much money to make it, had to make some choices in pacing and the amount that they could shoot to just get it in the can. It's a bit of a shame. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. This is The Manhattan Project. We review a new movie every single day, which means that we'll be back tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day.